Welcome to Nachtmeier Witness. Some nights feel wrong before anything happens. The air feels heavy, the room feels colder, and somewhere in the dark, you get the strange feeling that you are being watched. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who became witnesses to things they never expected to see. Some saw someone standing in the shadows. Some heard voices with no one nearby. Others found themselves in places that did not feel real at all. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, dark atmosphere, subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. Get comfortable. The night has already begun. I grew up in a haunted house, so I have a lot of stories like this. The house itself was already creepy enough before anything strange ever happened. It was huge, about 5,000 square feet, with 3 stories, sitting right in the middle of the woods. It was not some ancient mansion from the 1800s or anything dramatic like that. It was actually fairly modern, built sometime in the 1960s. But newer houses can still feel wrong, especially when they are surrounded by trees and silence. This house definitely felt wrong. There were parts of it that never felt empty, even when you knew nobody else was there. Certain rooms had a heaviness to them, like the air was thicker inside. Certain hallways made you walk faster without knowing why. At night, the whole place seemed to hold sound differently. Every creak, every shift in the walls, every footstep seemed to travel through the floors and disappear into the dark corners. It was the kind of house where you could be alone in a room and still feel watched. One night, we were all downstairs watching TV in the basement. We called it the basement, but it was really the ground level floor at the bottom of the house. Because of the way the house was built, the kitchen was directly above the TV room. So if someone walked through the kitchen, you could hear it from downstairs. That night, it was nearly 10 p.m., and we were all settled and watching a movie. Everything was calm. Then we heard footsteps above us. Heavy footsteps. It sounded exactly like a man wearing work boots stomping through the kitchen. Not soft floorboards settling, not a little creak from the house cooling down, not a faint tap or random noise. These were clear, deliberate steps moving across the kitchen right over our heads. Someone was walking upstairs. We paused the movie. Everyone went quiet. Then we all looked at each other with the same expression. Not confusion exactly, more like recognition. Like, oh no, not this again. That was the strange thing about living in that house. After a while, weird things became familiar, but they never became normal. You could know the pattern. You could recognize that something was happening again, but it did not make it any less frightening. My grandpa told us to stay downstairs. Then he went upstairs to check. We sat there in silence while he was gone. Nobody wanted to talk. We were all listening, waiting to hear the footsteps again, waiting for my grandpa to call out, waiting for some normal explanation that would make all of us feel stupid for being scared. But the house stayed quiet. About 5 minutes later, my grandpa came back downstairs. He looked at us and said, "All the doors are locked. All the lights are off. There's no one in the house." Nobody knew what to say. We just stared at each other. There was no burglar, no family member walking around upstairs, no open door, no light left on, no reason for what we had all heard. But because this kind of thing happened in that house, we eventually did what people do when they cannot solve something. We went back to the movie. That sounds ridiculous now. You hear unexplained footsteps stomping through an empty kitchen above your head. Someone checks and confirms there is no one there, and then you just press play again. But when you live in a place like that, life does not stop every time something strange happens. You still eat dinner. You still watch TV. You still go to bed. You can be terrified, but the house is still your house, and you have to keep living inside it. But the footsteps were not the only thing. When I was little, I used to see black figures walking around the upstairs part of the house. That upstairs floor was the worst part. There was a balcony area that overlooked the library or conversation room below. The layout was strange because everything connected in a loop. The balcony connected to my grandparents' bedroom. Their bedroom connected to a bathroom. The bathroom connected to the sewing room. The sewing room connected to the staircase landing. And the landing connected back to the other side of the balcony. So if you walked through that whole section, you could make a complete circle. That floor felt haunted as hell. I do not know how else to describe it. Even during the day, it felt strange. At night, it was worse. The rooms were too quiet. The corners felt too dark. And because of the way everything looped around, it always felt like something could be moving behind you without you knowing where it had come from. My sister and I hated using the bathroom up there. We would go together because neither of us wanted to be alone in that part of the house. That became our rule. If one of us had to use the bathroom, the other one came along and waited nearby. It sounds silly, but it did not feel silly then. It felt necessary. One time, we were in my grandparents' bathroom. My sister was using the toilet, and I was standing near the sink, waiting for her. I remember the room feeling normal at first. Quiet, but normal. Nothing had happened yet. No sound, no movement. Then I saw something from the corner of my eye. It came from the doorway leading into my grandparents' bedroom. I turned to look. There was a huge black figure walking around inside their room. It was not a shadow on the wall. It was not a coat hanging on a chair. It was not my imagination turning furniture into a person. It was shaped like a person, but completely black. No face, no clothes, no details. Just a large, dark figure moving around in the bedroom. I panicked. I started screaming, "Black thing, black thing." My sister jumped up immediately. Neither of us waited to see what it would do. We ran. We bolted out of the bathroom, through the sewing room, and toward the stairs. And as we ran, we heard it. The black thing started running too. We could hear it moving through my grandparents' bedroom, then across the balcony behind us. Heavy, fast movement. It was following the same loop we were running through. That was the part that made it so much worse. It was not just something I saw for 1 second and then imagined afterward. We both heard it behind us. We heard it moving. We heard it running. We flew down the stairs as fast as we could. The whole time, it sounded like it was coming after us. Then, the second we reached the kitchen, the noise stopped. Just stopped. No footsteps, no movement, nothing coming down the stairs after us. We stood there terrified, staring back toward the staircase, waiting for it to appear at the top or come rushing down after us. But nothing came. That was what that house was like. You could be downstairs with your family, watching a movie, and hear heavy boots stomping through an empty kitchen. You could be upstairs in the bathroom with your sister and see a huge black figure moving through a bedroom. You could run from it and hear it running behind you, only for it to stop the second you reached another part of the house. It was not one strange incident. It was a pattern. The house was big, quiet, and buried in the woods, which already made it feel isolated from the rest of the world. But whatever was inside it made certain rooms feel occupied, even when nobody was there. And that upstairs floor, with its strange loop of rooms and balcony, always felt like it belonged to something else too. My wife lived in Samoa for a while, and while she was there, she witnessed something she still cannot explain. She is not the kind of person who believes every strange story she hears. If anything, she is fairly skeptical, especially when it comes to things like possession, spirits, and traditional healers. She respects other people's beliefs, but she does not automatically accept something as true just because someone says it is. That is part of what makes this story so strange, because she went into it expecting not to believe. There was a local girl who had become very sick. At first, it seemed like an ordinary illness, nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic, just a girl who was not well. But as time went on, her condition kept getting worse. She declined little by little until eventually she could not walk. My wife said the girl had what looked like a large tumor at the top of her leg. It was visible, serious looking, and impossible to ignore. Anyone looking at it would have assumed there was some kind of medical explanation. A growth, an infection, an injury, something physical that doctors would be able to identify. So the girl was taken to the hospital. But according to my wife, the doctors could not find anything wrong with her. They examined her, but whatever was happening did not show up the way they expected. There was no clear diagnosis, no simple answer, no treatment that seemed to fix the problem. Eventually, they sent her home. After that, things started to feel hopeless. The girl was still getting worse. She still could not walk. Nobody seemed to know what was happening to her or how to help. From the way my wife described it, the people around her were beginning to fear she might die. That was when a local medicine woman became involved. She said she believed the girl was possessed. She believed there was a spirit inside her, and she believed she could force it out. My wife heard about it and decided to go along to watch. Not because she thought it would work, but because she had never seen anything like it before. In her mind, it was probably going to be superstition. Maybe chanting, ritual words, dramatic gestures, and people convincing themselves something had happened. She expected to leave with a rational explanation, or at least something she could dismiss later, but she wanted to see it for herself. The ceremony began with the medicine woman putting the girl to sleep, or maybe into some kind of trance, on the floor. My wife could not say exactly what state the girl was in. She only knew the girl was lying there, still and unresponsive in a way that did not look like ordinary sleep. Then the medicine woman stood over her. She placed her foot directly on the girl's bad leg, right on the swollen area. Then she started grinding down on it with her foot. My wife braced herself. She expected the girl to scream. That would have been the natural reaction. If the swelling was painful, if it really was some kind of tumor, injury, or infection, then having someone press their foot into it should have caused agony. My wife expected crying, panic, or at least some kind of physical response. But that was not what happened. Instead, the girl started speaking, in a man's voice. That was the first moment where my wife's skepticism cracked. This was not just the girl groaning in pain. It was not her voice sounding strained or deeper because she was scared. According to my wife, the voice sounded male, completely different from the girl's normal voice. Different enough that everyone in the room reacted. The locals present said they recognized the voice. They said it belonged to a man who was buried in front of the house. That detail matters because, in Samoa, many families live on family land. Land is often passed down through generations, and many families bury their dead on their own property rather than in cemeteries. So, having a grave in front of the house was not unusual there. The people in the room believed the spirit speaking through the girl was the man buried outside. The medicine woman demanded that the spirit leave the girl's body. The voice refused. It did not want to go. The medicine woman kept ordering it to leave, and the voice kept resisting. The whole thing became more intense, and my wife stood there watching, unsure what she was actually seeing. She had gone there expecting to observe something cultural, maybe something strange, but explainable. Now she was not so sure. Then the medicine woman threatened it. She said that if the spirit did not leave the girl, she would open the grave and pour boiling water over the man's bones. That changed everything. The voice gave in. It agreed to leave. And then came the part my wife has never been able to explain. At the exact moment the spirit said it was leaving the girl's body, all the local dogs outside suddenly went insane. Before that, they had been lying around in the sun, quiet and lazy, doing what dogs do in the heat. Resting, half asleep, barely moving. Then, all at once, they erupted. They started barking and snarling like they had seen something. Then they took off running from the house toward the grave, not wandering, not casually reacting to some noise. They raced in the same direction, barking furiously, as if they were chasing something invisible. My wife watched them go, stunned. Inside the house, the girl was still lying there on the floor. Outside, every dog was tearing toward the buried man's grave. To the people there, it seemed obvious. The spirit had left the girl, and the dogs were chasing it back to where it belonged. My wife did not know what to think. She still does not. She remains skeptical. She does not go around claiming she definitely watched a real possession or a real exorcism. She knows there may be explanations she does not understand. Maybe the girl was in some altered mental state. Maybe the voice had a psychological explanation. Maybe the swelling was something the doctors missed. Maybe the dogs reacted to a sound or movement outside that nobody else noticed. But she has never been able to explain all of it together. The illness, the swelling at the top of the girl's leg, the doctors finding nothing, the girl speaking in a man's voice, the locals recognizing that voice as the man buried outside, the medicine woman threatening the grave, the voice suddenly agreeing to leave, and then, at that exact moment, every dog outside exploding into barking and running straight toward the man's grave. My wife went there expecting to see superstition. She left with a memory that still bothers her. Not because she is certain of what happened, but because she is not. When I was 3 years old, my family moved into a brand new house. And I mean brand new. We were the first people on our street to move in. The rest of the neighborhood was still being built around us, and the other houses were not even finished until a few weeks after we arrived. Everything inside our house was new. The walls, the floors, the doors, the windows, the paint, all of it. It was not some old house with a long, dark history. It was not a place that had been standing for 100 years. Before the neighborhood was built, the land had just been farmland, massive fields of crops, nothing else. That is what made everything so hard to understand later. This happened when I was about 4.5. At that age, I had this serious belief that if I concentrated hard enough, I could eventually get X-ray vision like Superman. I was completely convinced it was possible. So whenever I woke up in the middle of the night, I did not just roll over and go back to sleep like a normal kid. I practiced. I would stare at the wall, or my dresser, or the back of my hand. I would focus as hard as I could, trying to see through something, absolutely certain that one night, if I tried hard enough, it would finally happen. Obviously, it never did. But when you are that young, belief does not need logic. I was sure I could train myself into having superpowers. It became part of my nighttime routine. If I woke up and could not fall asleep again, I would lie there in the dark and try to unlock my X-ray vision. One night, I woke up around 1 a.m. I remember looking at my Toronto Blue Jays clock on the wall and checking the time. The room was dark, but not completely black. There was enough faint light to make out the familiar shapes around me. My bed, my dresser, The walls, the clock, everything looked normal. So, like usual, I lifted my hand in front of my face and started trying to see through it. For about 5 minutes, nothing strange happened. I just sat there in bed, half awake, staring at the back of my hand with the kind of intense focus only a small child can have. I was sure that if I concentrated hard enough, eventually I would see something. Bone, light, maybe just a faint outline that would prove it was working. Then I heard what sounded like a whisper. At first, I thought it might have been my sister. She was only a year older than me, and her room was next to mine. Maybe she was awake too. Maybe she had said something through the wall. Kids wake up at strange times, and my mind went to the easiest explanation first. So I ignored it. I kept staring at my hand, still trying as hard as I could. Then I heard a man's voice call my name. I froze. My father worked the night shift at the time. Most nights, he did not get home until around 4 a.m., so it should not have been him. There should not have been any man in the house at all. I sat there in bed, completely still. Suddenly, I was too scared to move. I did not know where the voice had come from. I did not know who it belonged to, and I did not understand why it knew my name. Then the voice laughed at me. Not a friendly laugh, not a playful laugh, a mean laugh. Then it said it was going to get me. After that, everything went silent. For about 5 seconds, I just sat there. Those 5 seconds felt endless. I was too young to reason through it. I could not tell myself it was stress, imagination, or some strange noise in the walls. I only knew that a man's voice had called my name in the middle of the night, laughed at me, and told me it was going to get me. Then I screamed. I screamed bloody murder. I woke everyone in the house. My mother came running into my room and asked what was wrong, but I was hysterical. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. She sat with me for what felt like forever, probably close to half an hour, until I finally calmed down enough to tell her what had happened. I asked her if it had been Dad. In a way, I wanted it to be him. As cruel as that joke would have been, at least it would have meant there was an explanation. At least the voice would have belonged to someone I knew. At least there would not have been some unknown man speaking to me from the dark. I asked why Dad would do something so mean. But my mother told me my father was still at work. He had not come home yet. She said I must have been dreaming. Maybe I was. That is the explanation I have tried to hold on to over the years. I was 4.5. I had woken up in the middle of the night. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe a dream followed me into the room for a few seconds. Maybe my mind created the whisper, the voice, the laugh, and the threat. Maybe none of it was real, but the fear I felt afterward was real. And it changed me. Before that night, I was a pretty confident kid. I was not constantly scared. I did not think of the house as unsafe. I did not worry about being alone in my bedroom. It was just my room, in a new house, in a new neighborhood. After that night, it never felt the same again. I never slept with my bedroom door closed after that. Not once. And at least once a week. For years, I would wake up in the middle of the night and yell for my mother because something did not feel right. I did not always hear anything. I did not always see anything. But the feeling would come back. That same cold certainty. The sense that something was wrong in the room with me. That one night turned me into a child who was afraid of everything. The strangest part is that nothing like that ever happened again. My parents still live in that house. There were no other voices, no strange figures, no dramatic haunting that followed us through the years. The house had been brand new when we moved in. We were the first family on the street. The land had only been farmland before the neighborhood was built. There was no old house there, no known tragedy, no obvious story to explain what I heard. And yet, that room still bothers me. Even now, if I go over to my parents' house at night and pass by what used to be my bedroom, something about it makes me uneasy. It does not matter that I am grown now. It does not matter that the room is just a room. It still carries the feeling of that night. The Toronto Blue Jays clock on the wall, the dark bedroom, the back of my hand in front of my face, the whisper, the man's voice saying my name, the laugh, and then those words. It was going to get me. I do not know what it was. I do not know if it was a dream, my imagination, my father somehow playing a joke that everyone denied, or something else entirely. All I know is that after that night, I never felt safe in that room again. After my first and only year of college, I moved in with a friend of mine. My mom had moved to North Carolina with her new husband, and I did not want to leave Massachusetts. It was my home state, and even though I did not have everything figured out, I knew I was not ready to go with her. So I stayed behind and moved in with a friend for a few months. Her name was Corey. After a little while, Corey's biological father, though not her legal father, offered us one of his apartments to rent. At the time, it felt like a good opportunity. I was young, trying to be independent, and the idea of having an actual apartment with my friend sounded exciting. Corey had told me a lot about her father before I met him properly. According to her, he had been involved in organized crime for most of his life. She said it casually, like it was just part of who he was. He was not ashamed of it either. He would talk about things openly enough that it almost made it harder to believe. I was always a little skeptical, mostly because he was so strange. And I mean strange in a very specific way. He was well off. He owned several properties in Boston and clearly had money, but he only ever wore ragged jeans and a hooded sweatshirt. He would come up with bizarre theories and argue them at you for hours, not really having a conversation so much as forcing you to listen while he talked himself in circles. He could be generous on a whim, then completely unsettling 5 minutes later. One day, out of nowhere, he bought 2 all-black German Shepherds for almost $1,000 each and asked if he could crate them in my room. That was the kind of guy he was. Weird enough that you questioned everything he said, but connected enough that you also did not want to question him too loudly. When moving day finally came, I was excited. It was my first real place on my own, or at least the closest thing I had to one. Corey and I had plans for decorating, arranging furniture, making it feel like ours. I was young, hopeful, and mostly focused on the fun parts of having a place away from parents. While I was moving some of my things in with the help of my boyfriend, we met the downstairs tenant. His name was Chicky. At one point, he had been the brother-in-law of Corey's father. Chicky had the kind of strung-out behavior that makes you think someone has been on something for a long time. He was not threatening in that first conversation, but he had that restless, worn-down energy that made me cautious. I was polite, but not overly warm. He told me I was going to love the place. He said the washer and dryer in the basement worked great. He said he was glad the old tenant was gone. Then he said something that stuck with me. Shows him to call Chicky a cripple. Yeah? He had a bad leg. I did not really know what to say to that. I asked if Corey's father had kicked the old tenant out because of the remark. It seemed like a ridiculous reason to evict someone, but then again, Corey's father was not exactly normal. Chicky laughed. "You could say that," he said. At the time, I did not know what to do with that answer, so I just filed it away in the part of my brain where you keep things that feel wrong but not immediately dangerous. A couple of weeks went by, and I started settling into the apartment. It was not perfect. The train ride to work was long, but it was no worse than where I had been staying before. My boyfriend lived about 30 minutes away by car, so he came over sometimes, but not every night. Most of the time, it was just me and Corey trying to enjoy having our own place. The only thing I really hated was the key situation. Corey had the only proper key to the apartment, and she had been too lazy to make me one. The only key I had was a spare front door key from Chicky. So whenever Corey was not home, getting inside was a whole process. I would unlock the front door, go through the basement, and exit into the backyard. Then I had to hop up onto the back porch because the stairs there had not been finished yet. From there, I would climb the stairs up to our apartment and enter through the door on the porch. We did not keep that back door locked. At the time, it did not seem like a huge deal. The first floor porch had no stairs, so it felt like no one could easily get up there unless they were really determined. That assumption turned out to be wrong. One night, Corey was out, and I was alone in the apartment. I was just wasting time online, doing whatever I used to do on the internet at 19. It was around 1 a.m., and I was debating whether I should finally go to sleep. Then I heard music outside. Loud music. Obscenely loud. In the city, loud music is not unusual. Cars pass by blasting songs all the time. People sit outside with their speakers too high. You learn to ignore a lot of noise. But this was different because it did not pass. It kept going. 5 minutes. Then 10. Eventually, I got up and looked outside. There was a car parked in front of my house. It was running. I could not see inside. I have always been a generally nervous person, and something about that car sitting there with the music blasting creeped me out. There was no clear reason for it, but I felt uneasy. And even though we had not locked the back door once since moving in, that night, for some reason, I decided to lock it. I still think about that decision. I locked the door that led to our back porch. A little while later, the music stopped. I was relieved at first. Then I looked again and realized the car was still there. That relief disappeared. I went back to my room and lay down on my bed with my laptop, trying to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was just some drunk guy sitting in his car. Maybe someone waiting for a friend. Maybe someone lost. Maybe someone arguing on the phone. I tried to make it normal. Then I heard a car door open. It slammed shut. A man started yelling. He sounded drunk, but he was loud enough that I could hear every word through my closed windows. "I know you killed him," he shouted. Then again, "I know you're in there, and I know you fucking killed him." My stomach dropped. Immediately, I thought of the previous tenant. I thought of what Chicky had said when we moved in. Shows him to call Chicky a cripple. Yeah? I thought about Corey's father and all the stories about organized crime. I thought about how, casually, people talked around him, like bad things were normal. And for the first time, I did not completely dismiss the idea that maybe the old tenant had not simply moved out. Maybe something had happened. Maybe this man outside knew something, or believed he did. I was terrified. I reached for my phone to call my boyfriend. Looking back, I know I should have called the police. I was 19 and stupid and scared, and in that moment, my boyfriend felt like the safest person to call. Before I could, I heard footsteps. Loud footsteps. On the back stairs. That sound is still one of the worst things I have ever heard. The man must have tried the front door and failed. Then he must have gone around, hopped the fence, climbed up onto the unfinished, stairless back porch, and found his way to my apartment door. The same door we never locked. Except that night, I had. I froze in my room, listening. The doorknob rattled. I felt every bit of blood drain out of me. He tried it again. Rattle, rattle. Then he started banging on the door. I sat there, barely breathing, thanking every god I had ever heard of that I had locked it earlier. If I had not, he would have walked straight into the apartment. There would have been nothing between me and a drunk, furious man screaming about someone being murdered. He banged a few more times. I kept waiting for the sound of glass breaking. I thought he might punch through the window in the door, reach in, unlock it, and come inside. I was completely frozen, phone in hand, too scared to move, and too scared to make a sound. But he did not break the glass. After a few minutes, he left. Only then did I call my boyfriend. I cried while I told him what had happened. The next day, I told Corey. She had me repeat the whole story to her father. I do not know what he did with that information. I do not know if he made a call, paid someone a visit, or simply scared the man away somehow. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the guy sobered up and never came back on his own. But I never saw him again. And I never forgot how close he came to getting inside. The part that still bothers me is not just the man screaming outside. It is not even what he was screaming. It is the fact that, for weeks, I had left that back door unlocked, without thinking much of it. And then, on the one night someone actually climbed up and tried to open it, something made me lock it first. I figured I might as well throw my creepy story out there. This happened during my senior year of high school. At the time, I needed a ride to school, but I lived a little out of the way from the main road. One of my friends agreed to pick me up halfway, which meant I only had to walk to the end of my street, cut through a path in the woods that I used all the time, and meet her in a parking lot on the other side. From there, she would drive my lazy ass the rest of the way to school. Simple enough. That morning, I left like usual. It was around 6:45 a.m., still dark enough that everything had that early morning grayness to it. The world was quiet in the way neighborhoods are before most people are awake. No kids outside yet, no traffic, no normal daytime noise, just me, my backpack, and my usual speed walked toward the woods. I have always walked fast. People tease me for it all the time, but that morning, I was moving at my normal pace, trying to get to the parking lot where my friend would be waiting. When I was about 20 feet from the woods, I noticed someone behind me. He was far enough to my left that I could see him only out of the corner of my eye at first. An elderly man, probably around 75 years old. He was wearing a navy blue tracksuit, and from what I could tell, he looked Korean or possibly East Asian. That alone would not have scared me. People walk in the morning, older people especially. Maybe he was out for exercise. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was just taking a shortcut, same as me. But then I noticed what he was carrying. In his hand, he had some kind of tool with a plastic bag wrapped around the end. At first, my brain tried to make it harmless. For some reason, I thought it might be a spatula. I know that sounds ridiculous now, but when you do not want something to be threatening, your mind will reach for the dumbest explanations if they let you stay calm. So I kept walking. Then he started catching up to me. That was what really grabbed my attention. Like I said, I walk fast, and this man looked elderly. He should not have been able to close the distance that easily, especially not while carrying something. But every time I glanced sideways, he seemed a little closer. I sped up. So did he. That was when I got that cliché gut feeling that something was wrong. I was obsessed with Criminal Minds at the time, so at first, in my nervous teenage brain, I almost joked to myself that maybe he had killed someone and was on his way to dump the murder weapon in the creek that ran through the woods. Then I realized I should probably figure out what he was actually holding. By then, he was almost walking beside me. I kept darting my eyes over, trying not to make it obvious. The plastic grocery bag was wrapped around the head of the tool, but the shape underneath started becoming clearer. It was not a spatula, it was a hatchet, or maybe a small axe. The bag was wrapped around the blade. My stomach dropped. Suddenly, my dumb little criminal mind's joke did not feel funny anymore. Because now another thought hit me. Maybe I was the one he was planning to kill. Maybe the grocery bag was there to keep the weapon clean. I know that sounds dramatic. I know those are the kinds of thoughts people say are ridiculous afterward. But I was a 17-year-old girl walking alone in the dark with an axe-wielding man keeping pace beside me. Ridiculous or not, every instinct I had was screaming danger. At that point, I was nearly through the woods. All I had to do was cross a bridge over the creek, and then I would be at the parking lot where my friend was waiting. I was practically jogging by then, and somehow he was still keeping up. Then he started talking to me. That was when I knew for sure something was wrong. He asked where I was going. I told him school. Then he asked what school I went to. Like an idiot, I answered. I still hate that I did that, but when you are scared, your brain does strange things. Sometimes you answer because you do not want to seem rude. Sometimes you answer because you are trying not to escalate the situation. Sometimes you are so focused on staying alive that you do not think clearly. He muttered some other things too, but I barely remember them. I told him I had friends waiting for me. I wanted him to understand I was not alone. I wanted him to know someone would notice if I did not show up. I wanted to make myself seem like a bad target without outright accusing him of anything. But he kept walking beside me, less than 2 feet away, still holding the hatchet, still matching my pace. I wanted to run, but I was terrified that if I bolted too early, he would swing at me. He was close enough that one hit from that axe could have dropped me before I even had a chance to scream. So I kept moving. Fast, controlled, trying not to panic. We crossed the bridge over the creek. The parking lot was ahead. Then I saw my friend's car. The second I saw it, I made a break for it. You know how in scary movies, the victim runs as fast as they can, and somehow the monster or killer is still right behind them, even though they seem to be barely moving? That is exactly what it felt like. I sprinted for the car. I could feel him behind me. I did not look back. I just ran. I reached the car, yanked the door open, and practically fell inside. The first thing my friend said was, "Who was that creepy guy behind you?" I yelled something like, "Drive, drive, drive. Fucking axe." She did not ask questions after that. She peeled out of the parking lot. As we drove away, I looked back and could still see the man close behind the spot where I had just been. He had followed me all the way to the car. Eventually, I spoke to the police about it. And honestly, the things they ruled out only made the whole situation creepier. He was not one of the local homeless men who lived in the area. The police kept close tabs on who was usually around there, and they did not recognize my description. I also knew most of the families in the neighborhood, and only one family nearby was of Asian descent. They did not have any relatives visiting, and they were Thai, not Northern Asian like this man appeared to be. So, as far as we could tell, he did not live near the woods. That made the firewood explanation unlikely. There was also a city law that prohibited construction or loud work before 7:30 a.m., so there was no good reason for him to be walking around before then with a hatchet wrapped in a grocery bag. We never figured out who he was. There were no further sightings that I heard about. No explanation. No answer. Just an elderly man in a navy tracksuit walking unnaturally fast through the woods at 6:45 in the morning, carrying a covered axe and asking a teenage girl where she was going. Needless to say, I have not been back in those woods since. This story is not my own. It happened to my uncle when he was very young, probably around 10 or 11 years old from what I remember. He is in his early 50s now, so this happened a long time ago. I should also say up front that my uncle has always been known as a bit of a storyteller. He likes messing with people. A lot of his stories over the years have turned out to be practical jokes, meant to scare his kids, nieces, and nephews. Because of that, I would normally take anything creepy from him with a huge grain of salt. But this one is different. My mom, who is usually the first person to tell me when he is full of crap, has always said this story really happened. My grandmother confirmed it too. So as much as I might want to dismiss it as one of his usual scares, the people who were there swear it was true. At the time, my mother and her 3 brothers were living with my grandparents in a small house in Maryland, right on a riverbank. The house was not huge, but it had a lot of character. The front faced the street, while the back faced the river. On the first floor, there was 1 bedroom. There was also an attic that my grandfather had converted into 2 more bedrooms, and a basement that he used as his workshop. My grandfather was, and still is, an incredibly talented artist and carpenter. Before he retired, he designed ships for the Navy. He has always been the kind of man who can build, repair, or improve almost anything with his hands. So his basement was full of woodworking tools, regular household tools, easels for painting, supplies, and whatever project he happened to be working on at the time. Because he was always working with wood, the basement constantly had a layer of sawdust on the floor. Even now, when I visit him, there is usually sawdust scattered across the cold concrete and the wooden steps leading up to the first floor. It is just part of the house, part of him. That basement has always smelled like wood, dust, tools, and old concrete. Back then, since my mother was the only girl, she had her own room near my grandparents'. The boys all slept downstairs in the bedroom on the first floor. The basement entrance was at the rear of the house, facing the riverbank. There was also a door inside that led from the basement up to the first floor. That door had a small latch lock on it. My grandfather would sometimes forget to fully close the outside basement door, the one that opened toward the river. That detail matters. One night, my uncle was asleep in the boys' room when he woke up to a sound. Tick, tick, tick. It was quiet at first. Just a small, repeated sound coming from somewhere outside the bedroom. He lay there listening, half asleep, trying to figure out what it was. At that age, you do not always jump straight to fear. Sometimes a sound is just a sound. Maybe it was an air conditioner. Maybe pipes. Maybe something settling in the house. He convinced himself it was probably nothing. Maybe a faulty air conditioner. Eventually, he fell back asleep. Sometime later, maybe an hour or 2 according to him, he woke up again. The sound was still there. Tick, 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 only now it seemed louder. There were pauses between the sounds, like someone was doing it deliberately, not a fast mechanical ticking, not the steady hum click of an appliance, more like something hard tapping against something else. He lay there in the dark, listening tick, tick, tick. This time, he got out of bed. Slowly, he walked to the bedroom door and opened it. The house was dark and quiet. Everyone else was asleep. He stood there for a moment, trying to locate the sound. Then he realized it was coming from the basement. That alone would have been enough to scare most kids. The basement was not just a finished room downstairs. It was a workshop, a dark, cold space full of tools, sawdust, stairs, shadows, and the door that led out toward the riverbank. At night, with the rest of the house asleep, it would have felt very far away from safety. My uncle did not go down there. He just stood at his bedroom door, listened long enough to know the sound was definitely coming from below, and then closed the door again. The ticking continued. Tick, tick, tick. He did what a lot of kids do when they are scared and have no idea what else to do. He went back to bed. He pulled the covers around himself and tried to force his body to sleep, while the sound continued somewhere beyond his room. I do not know how long it went on. Maybe it stopped eventually. Maybe he simply got tired enough that his brain shut down despite the fear. Either way, by morning, the night felt distant. He woke up to my grandmother calling everyone to breakfast. The house was bright again. People were moving around. Food was being made. The normal sounds of family life had returned. And for a little while, he forgot about the ticking completely. Then, during breakfast, he remembered. He told everyone what had happened. He explained that he had woken up in the night to a ticking sound, that it had happened more than once, and that when he checked, it sounded like it was coming from the basement. Everyone became curious. Now that it was morning, the sound seemed less frightening and more like a mystery. Maybe something had been dripping. Maybe one of my grandfather's tools had fallen. Maybe some machine had been making noise. Whatever it was, they wanted to see. My uncle went to the basement door. He unlocked the latch. Then he opened it. At the top of the stairwell, lying there in the sawdust, was a screwdriver. And in the sawdust on the steps, there was a butt print. Someone had been sitting there, not standing, not passing through. Sitting right on the basement stairs, on the other side of the locked door. There were footprints in the sawdust too. They led up and down the stairs, then out through the basement door toward the riverbank. That was when everyone understood what the ticking had been. Sometime during the night, someone had gotten into the basement from outside. Maybe my grandfather had not closed the rear basement door all the way, or maybe whoever it was had managed to open it. They had gone inside, picked up one of my grandfather's screwdrivers, climbed the basement stairs, and sat near the locked door that led into the house. Then, while everyone slept, they tapped the screwdriver against the door. Tick, tick, tick. My uncle had been lying in his room, listening to it, thinking it was some strange noise in the house. But it had been a person, a real person, sitting in the dark basement just beyond the locked door, tapping with a screwdriver. For hours. That is the part that makes this story so unsettling to me. Not a ghost, not a shadow, not some strange thing moving through the house. A person. Someone had entered from the riverside of the house and sat there in the dark while the family slept on the other side of the door. And if that little latch had not been locked, there would have been nothing stopping them from coming upstairs. I wish I had found this thread earlier, because this is one of those stories I have always wanted to tell somewhere. A long time ago, a friend and I were hanging out at his house in rural Pennsylvania. His house was surrounded by woods, and not just a little patch behind a neighborhood. I mean empty woods for acres and acres. A lot of that land belonged to an old hospital in the area, Wernersville State Hospital. Back then, people still thought of it more as an old insane asylum, even though by the time this happened, most of the land around it was not really being used anymore. The area had a strange history. Before the hospital, or maybe around the same general era, parts of the land had been used as a resort area. So if you wandered far enough into the woods, you could still find pieces of the old world hidden out there. Old roads, stone walls, foundations, bits of structures that had been swallowed by the forest over the years. Most of it had been abandoned for more than a century. Trees had grown through roads, vines covered old walls, leaves and dirt had buried anything that people had not touched in decades. For us, being 14 and stupid, it was fun. We would hike around and try to find old ruins. Our method was simple. We would keep walking uphill for as long as we wanted, and when it was time to go home, we would find a stream bed and follow it downhill until we came out somewhere we recognized. That day started like any other exploration. We headed into the woods with no real plan, just looking for whatever we could find. After a while, maybe 4 or 5 miles out, we came across an old shed. Back when the hospital was bigger, before modern medicine reached a point where people could be treated instead of just locked away, the patients were sometimes used for manual labor. A lot of that work was farming, maintaining the land, and doing whatever needed to be done around the property. This shed seemed to be connected to that. The door was old and rotted, and there was an iron lock on it that looked like it had been there forever. The wood around it was in such bad shape that we were able to pop the lock off and get inside. At first it was not creepy. It was actually kind of fascinating. Inside were old tools, still sitting there like someone had walked away and never come back. There were huge shovels, maybe 15 feet long, the kind used to dig trenches. There were man-powered plows. There were scythes. Everything was covered in 100 years of rust, but the tools were still exactly where they had been left. It felt like stepping into a frozen piece of history. Not scary, just cool. We kept walking. Eventually, we came to a clearing, and this clearing was different. It was obviously man-made. There were no trees in it at all, just a perfect circle of tall grass. That alone was strange, because the woods around it were thick, and nature had taken over almost everything else. But here the open space remained. In the tall grass, we saw concrete cones sticking up from the ground. There were a couple dozen of them. They were about 3 feet tall and evenly spaced, almost like the rows in a military graveyard, except there were no individual names or markers on them. Just those strange concrete cones standing in the grass. We walked around until we found a stone marker in the very center of the circle. It had a brass plate on it. The plate explained what the place was. A long time ago, there had been a fire in whatever building had once stood there. Patients from the hospital had been working inside when it happened, and they died in the fire. Because of the severity of the fire, and because many of the patients had no known identities, none of them could be identified. Some had been found. Some had been dropped off. Some had no records that could properly tell anyone who they were, so they were buried there. Later, the cemetery was made official with the cones and the marker. Since the patients had already been buried on that spot, I guess they never rebuilt whatever structure had burned down. By then, the sun was starting to set, and suddenly, the whole day felt different. A few minutes earlier, we had been 2 kids exploring old ruins in the woods. Now we were standing in an anonymous mass grave where patients had died in a fire and been buried without names. That was enough to creep us out, but there was also the practical fear. We were miles out in the woods. The light was fading. Neither of us wanted to run into a buck, a mountain lion, or anything else in the dark. So we decided it was time to head back. We started walking downhill. Not the same way we had come, because the nearest stream bed led down a different part of the hill. That was normal for us. Follow water downward until something looked familiar. Before we had gone more than a couple of miles, we found another old foundation. It looked like one of the old resort buildings. We could tell because it was made from mortared natural stones, not brick or poured cement. Whatever had once stood there was long gone. All that remained was the outline of the foundation and piles of stones where the walls had collapsed. The roof beams were still there too, rotting across the floor. We picked our way into the center. It was easier to explore than some of the other ruins because most of the walls had fallen outward, leaving the original floor exposed and surrounded by mounds of stone. The fireplace was still in recognizable shape, so my friend went over to check that out. I wandered a little farther in. We were both still freaked out from the grave, but we were 14. We were also on the football team, and neither of us wanted to be the one to admit we were scared. So instead of saying, "This is creepy and we should leave," we kept pretending to be brave and explored more. That was when I noticed something white on the floor. It was bunched up in one of the bare spots. It stood out immediately because everything else around us was old, dirty, brown, gray, and covered in leaves. This thing was bright, too clean-looking, too recent. I went over to it. It was a blanket, a cheap white blanket. That was already strange. It looked completely out of place inside an old ruined foundation in the middle of the woods. I picked it up and flipped it over, and that was when I saw writing stamped in the corner. The ink was faded, and the light was getting low, so I had to hold it up toward what little sunlight was left. I read it out loud as I worked through the words. Property of Wernersville State Hospital. Not to leave the premises. If found, please call. Then there was a phone number, and a line telling whoever found it to report where it was found immediately. I looked up. My friend had completely dropped the tough guy act. He was white as a sheet. That was when I noticed something else. The area where I was standing was strangely clean. Not clean like someone had polished it, but clean in a way that made no sense for an abandoned ruin in the middle of the woods. There were no leaves, no loose stones, no branches, just level dirt, like it had been swept. That was the moment both of us lost it. We did not discuss it. We did not investigate further. We did not try to figure out who had been there or why a hospital blanket was lying in the middle of an old ruined resort foundation miles from anything. We ran. Both of us were on the football team, and we sprinted like our lives depended on it. Through the woods, downhill, over roots, around trees, not caring about noise or direction as long as we were moving away from that place. Eventually, we found a field, then a road. Then, finally, we found our way back to my friend's house. We told his parents what happened, and they reported it to the hospital. The hospital did not say anything revealing. But honestly, what were they going to say? If they had lost a patient, they were not exactly going to admit it to two teenagers and their parents. Maybe the blanket had been dumped there by someone else. Maybe a homeless person had been sleeping in that old foundation. Maybe someone stole it from the hospital years earlier and left it there for some reason. Maybe, but I still think about that swept dirt, that clean, bare space in the middle of a ruined building, deep in the woods. I think about the anonymous graves we had found just before it. I think about that white blanket with the hospital stamp. And I think about how quickly both of us understood, without saying a word, that we needed to run. Before the next witness tells their story, take a moment to subscribe to Nachtmeyer Witness. This channel is for the late hours, when sleep is close, but the mind is still awake enough to notice every sound in the room. New true stories arrive here, for anyone drawn to strange encounters, uneasy memories, and nights that never felt normal again. Leave a like if the stories have pulled you in so far. Now, let's return to the darkness. Back in the early 1990s, a friend of mine was moving out of her family's house. I had grown up with her, so I knew the house pretty well from the outside. I had heard stories about it for years, not just from her, but from her parents and her sister too. According to all of them, the place was completely haunted. The strange thing was that her father had actually grown up in that house. Years later, after being away from it for a long time, he bought it back so he could raise his own family there. His reason was not just nostalgia. He said he missed the ghosts. That tells you a lot about the house. It was not a normal place. It was also old. Very old. It had been built sometime in the mid-1700s, and in the late 1800s, several people had died there from scarlet fever, including children. So even before we moved in, the house already had the kind of history that makes every creak feel heavier. When my friend's family moved out, the house became available. so I rented it with two friends. At first, the strange things were small. We would hear noises at night, dishes rattling in the kitchen, doors opening and closing, the kind of sounds that make you sit up in bed and listen, telling yourself it was probably the house settling or a draft moving through the old rooms. In the beginning, it freaked us out, but after a while, we got used to it. That sounds strange, but when you live somewhere long enough, even frightening things can become part of the routine. You still jump when you hear something in the dark, but after enough nights, you start saying things like, "It's just the house," and go back to whatever you were doing. For a while, that was enough. Then things started getting harder to ignore. Outside my bedroom door, there was a doorway that led up to the attic. One day, I heard a commotion in the hallway and went to my bedroom door to see what was happening. Just as I got there, my roommate's cat came charging down from the attic. I had never seen an animal look that scared. The cat flew down the steps, backed into a corner at the bottom of the stairs, and started hissing and growling. Its body was low, its fur was up, and its eyes were locked on something back up the attic stairs. I stood there watching. At first, I thought maybe another animal had gotten in somehow. A raccoon, maybe, or another cat. Something that had scared him out of the attic. But then the cat's head started moving. Slowly, it was tracking something coming down the stairs. I could not see anything, but the cat could. Its eyes followed whatever it was, step by step, coming down from the attic until it stopped directly in front of me. The cat was staring at a point maybe 4 feet away from where I stood. Then it hissed harder. It was not hissing at the stairs anymore. It was hissing at something right in front of me, something I could not see. A second later, the cat completely lost it. It bolted past me, hissing the whole way, and tore down the stairs. We did not see that cat again for 4 days. That was one of the first incidents that made the house feel less like a quirky old haunted place and more like something we maybe should not be living in. Another incident happened when my roommate and I were unloading groceries in the driveway. A guy on a motorcycle pulled in. It turned out to be a mutual friend, someone neither of us had seen or heard from in years. It was unexpected but nice. We invited him inside, and he followed us through the house. As he was walking down the main hallway, we reached the bottom of the stairs. He suddenly stopped. Then he blurted out, "When did a little boy die in this house?" We just stared at him. That was not a normal question. I asked him what he meant, and he asked again, "When did a little boy die here?" I told him what I knew. In the late 1800s, at least one child and an elderly woman had died in the house from fever, scarlet fever, from what we had been told. Then we asked him why he was asking. He said there was a little boy sitting on the stairs. The boy was wearing rough spun clothing and holding either a candle or an oil lantern. He had been sitting there quietly, watching us. Then, when he realized our friend could see him, he got up, walked back upstairs, and went toward the attic. Our friend was not even that freaked out. He said he had experienced things like that before, but we were freaked out enough for all of us, because he had no reason to know about the history of the house. He had not been part of our conversations about the place. He had not been around when we talked about the ghosts or the fever deaths. He had simply walked inside, stopped at the stairs, and asked when a little boy had died there. After that, the house felt different again. But the last incident was the one that really got to me. It happened in my bedroom. There was a restaurant across the street from the house, and sometimes employees and friends would hang around late at the outside bar after closing. It was never a huge problem. You might hear voices or movement outside late at night, but it was normal enough that we did not worry about it. One night, I was half asleep when I heard a baby crying. At first, I was not fully awake. I was in that strange in-between state where you hear something, but your brain has not decided yet whether it belongs to a dream or the real world. The crying continued. A baby, at around 4 in the morning. That was what pulled me closer to being awake. I remember thinking, half conscious, why would someone have a baby outside at 4 in the morning? Then another thought hit me. The house sat on a bad corner. Car accidents happened out front sometimes, and some of them were serious. So for a second, I thought maybe there had been an accident. Maybe someone had crashed, and there was a baby in the car. That thought woke me up completely. I lay still, listening. I expected to hear tires, metal, shouting, someone calling for help, anything that would make sense of a baby crying outside at that hour. Then the crying stopped. For a second, I wondered if I had dreamed it. I stayed still in bed, fully awake now, staring into the dark. Then I felt one of our cats walking across my bed. That was normal enough at first. We had cats in the house, and anyone who has had cats knows the feeling of one walking across the blankets. The mattress shifts slightly. The covers pull against your leg. You feel the little points of weight moving step by step. I could feel it clearly. The cat walked across the bed near my legs. I could even feel the covers slide across my leg in response to its weight. So I reached over to scratch its head. My hand touched an ice-cold pocket of air. Not fur, not a body, just cold. The kind of cold that feels sharply out of place in a warm room. I turned on the light and jumped out of bed. There was no cat. My bedroom door was closed. There was not even a cat in the room. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the empty bed. I knew what I had felt. I had been awake. I had felt the pressure of paws walking across the blankets. I had felt the bedding shift against my leg. I had reached for the cat expecting fur, and instead my hand had passed into a patch of freezing cold air. That was the incident that really stayed with me. I was 25 or 26 at the time, not a little kid. And still, after that night, I slept with the lights on for several nights. Eventually, the whole place became too much. The dishes rattling, the doors opening, the cat fleeing from something invisible on the attic stairs, the little boy seen by someone who knew nothing about the house, and then the baby crying at 4 in the morning, followed by something walking across my bed that was not there. We had tried to get used to the house. For a while, we even did. But some houses do not let you stay comfortable for long. And that old place, built in the 1700s and carrying all the history that came with it, eventually made it very clear that we were not living there alone. It is probably too late to post this, since the thread has kind of moved on, but whatever. Here goes. This happened about 12 years ago in Santa Rosa, California, during the summer. My brother and I used to stay up late all the time. Sometimes, if we were bored enough and still had energy, we would go out around 2 or 3 in the morning and skate random parking lots or school grounds. He skateboarded. I rollerbladed. It was not exactly the smartest thing to do, but at that age it felt normal. The streets were empty, the air was cooler, and everything felt like it belonged to us for a few hours. There is something strange about being out that late when you are young. The world feels abandoned, but in a fun way, like you have found a secret version of your town that only exists after everyone else goes to sleep. One night, we decided to head out to a business park we both wanted to skate. It had a bunch of little 4 and 5 stair sets, which made it perfect for us. There was plenty of open space, smooth pavement, and nobody around to bother us. When we got there, the place was completely empty. No cars, no people, no security that we could see. Just quiet office buildings, dark windows, parking lot lights, and the sound of our wheels echoing through the empty space. We were making noise, obviously, Skateboards and rollerblades are not exactly quiet, especially in the middle of the night. But we were far enough away from any houses that we did not think anyone would care. It was just a business park after hours, and we figured we had the place to ourselves. For a while, everything was fine. We skated around, hit the stairs, messed around, and enjoyed the fact that nobody was there to kick us out. It was one of those nights that felt completely normal while it was happening. Nothing about the place seemed threatening. It was just empty, quiet, and perfect for skating. By around 3:30 a.m., the session was winding down. We were tired, sweaty, and ready to head home. My brother's car was parked at the far end of the lot, so we started cruising back toward it. That was when I noticed someone out of the corner of my eye. A man was walking toward us. At first, I only glanced at him. Then I looked properly. This guy was not ordinary. He was massive, a beast of a man. He had to be around 6'5" and easily over 250 pounds. He was dressed completely in black, and he was walking in our direction through the parking lot. My brother was a little ahead of me, so I sped up to catch him. In a low voice, I said, "Hey, there's a guy following us." My brother brushed it off. He thought I was messing with him. We joked around a lot, and I guess he figured I was trying to scare him because it was late and the place was empty. He kept cruising at the same relaxed pace like nothing was wrong, but I was starting to get scared. Something about the guy felt off. He was not just another person walking through the lot. There was no obvious reason for him to be there. No car nearby, no uniform, no flashlight, no sign that he was security. Just a huge man in black, moving toward us in the middle of an empty business park at 3:30 in the morning. I turned around to look again. This time, he was running. Not jogging, not walking faster, running as fast as he could. Straight toward us. I yelled, "He's chasing us. Go, go, go." My brother looked back. The second he saw the guy, he shouted, "Holy shit." Then we both took off as fast as our board and skates would carry us. The car suddenly felt impossibly far away. It was all the way at the other end of the parking lot, and the whole space seemed to stretch out in front of us. We were flying across the pavement, wheels rattling, pushing as hard as we could. But I could hear him behind us. That was the worst part. He did not yell anything. He did not say, "Stop." He did not say, "Police." He did not say, "Security." He did not say anything at all. All I could hear was his breathing. Heavy, fast, close at one point. I looked back and realized he was gaining on us. He was maybe 25 feet away. That does not sound like much until you are being chased through an empty business park at 3:30 in the morning by a huge man dressed in black. 25 feet feels like nothing. It feels like one mistake, one stumble, one bad push, and he is on you. We kept going. There was a planter or parking divider ahead of us, about 3 feet high and 3 feet wide. I hit it first and jumped it easily on my rollerblades. Then I looked back for my brother. He was not the best skater, so for one terrifying second, I thought he was going to wipe out. If he had clipped the edge, if his board had slipped, if he had fallen even for a second, that man would have been on him. But somehow, with this huge guy still coming after us, my brother ollied over the thing. I have no idea how he landed it. But he did. We kept moving. Finally, we reached the car. We scrambled inside, slammed the doors, started it, and got the hell out of there. As we pulled away, I looked back. The man had stopped in the middle of the parking lot. He was just standing there, trying to catch his breath. Then he looked at me. For 1 second, we made eye contact. He did not wave. He did not yell. He did not act like a security guard who had been trying to stop some kids from skating. He just stood there in the middle of that empty lot, and watched us leave. That was it. We never found out who he was. Maybe he was security. Maybe he was some random guy angry that we were skating there. Maybe he was homeless, drunk, high, or just out of his mind. Maybe he had some normal reason for being there. But I have never understood why he did not say anything. If he wanted us to leave, he could have yelled. If he was security, he could have identified himself. If we were trespassing, he could have told us to stop. Instead, he silently walked toward us, then broke into a full sprint and chased us across an empty parking lot at 3:30 in the morning. It may not be the scariest story ever, but it scared the hell out of us. And even now, my brother and I still bring it up every once in a while. A friend and I were in grade 6 when this happened. It was Halloween night, and I was at his house for the first time. His family had recently moved, or were in the process of moving, into a newly built house. The place still had that unfinished feeling new houses sometimes have before they are fully lived in. Not old, not worn down, not the kind of place you expect to feel creepy. But because it was Halloween, and because we were kids, everything already had a strange energy to it. We had plans to watch Tenacious D after trick-or-treating. Before we left, my friend went to his room, grabbed the movie, and brought it out. I watched him set it down on the couch. There was nothing unusual about it. He just put it there so it would be ready when we came back. Then we left to go trick-or-treating. We were out for a couple of hours, walking around the neighborhood, collecting candy, doing normal Halloween kid stuff. When we finally went back to his house, it was just the two of us there. His parents and his little brother were somewhere else. Nobody else had been in the house, at least as far as we knew. So when we got back and the movie was gone, it was weird. At first, we did not panic. We thought maybe we had remembered wrong. Maybe he had not actually brought it out of his room. Maybe he had set it somewhere else. Maybe one of us had moved it without thinking. That kind of thing happens all the time, especially when you are excited and running around on Halloween. So we started looking. We checked the couch, then his room, then the living room, then the rest of the house. We searched everywhere. And because the house was still pretty empty, there were not many places for it to hide. That made it even stranger. It was not like there were piles of furniture, boxes, cabinets full of stuff, or messy rooms where a movie could disappear easily. The place was mostly bare. Still, we looked for about an hour and a half. Nothing. Eventually, we gave up. We decided we would just watch something else, even though both of us were annoyed because we knew the movie had been there before we left. Right around that time, the phone rang. It was his dad calling to check up on us. The conversation was casual at first, just normal parent stuff, asking if we were okay, if we were back from trick-or-treating, what we were doing. Then my friend asked him if he knew where the movie was. The second he asked, the power went out. Just like that. Everything went black. We both froze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then we looked outside and realized something that made it worse. Everyone else still had power. The neighboring houses were lit up, streetlights were still on. It was not a neighborhood blackout. It was just his house. I used my cell phone to call his dad back, and he said it was probably just a circuit breaker or something. He told us where the breaker panel was and explained how to reset it. So, we went to the room with the panel. Neither of us knew the house very well, so we were already nervous, moving around in the dark. When we got to the room, there was this strange, messed-up glow inside. I do not really know how else to describe it. It was enough to see by, but it looked wrong. Since the house was new and we had no idea how everything worked yet, We assumed maybe it was some kind of backup light. At least, that was what I told myself. We went to the panel and started resetting the breaker. That was when my friend suddenly went very still. I did not notice anything at first. I was focused on the panel and on getting the lights back on. But later, he told me that while we were in that room, something grabbed his shoulder. He swears on his life that he felt it. A hand, a grip, something holding him. He said he could not talk while it was happening. I did not see it. I did not hear anything. I did not feel anything myself. All I knew at the time was that he had gone quiet and stiff beside me. Then we reset the breaker, and the power came back on. After that, we went to his room. That was when I realized something was really wrong with him. He was basically crying at that point. Not fake crying, not trying to scare me. He looked terrified. I had no idea why until he finally told me what he had felt in the breaker room. By then, I was freaked out too. The missing movie was weird enough. The power going out the second he asked about it was worse. But hearing him say something had grabbed him in the dark made the whole house feel suddenly unsafe. We decided to leave. We went to my house instead and stayed there for about an hour. I think both of us were trying to calm down and convince ourselves it had all been nothing. Maybe the movie was misplaced. Maybe the power outage was bad timing. Maybe he imagined the hand on his shoulder because we were already scared. But neither of us fully believed that. Then his dad called again. He told my friend he needed to go home. It was about 10 p.m., and his parents would not be back until around 11. My friend begged me to come with him and stay the night. I did not want to go back to that house, not after what had happened. But he was scared, and I did not want to leave him alone there, so I reluctantly went with him. We walked back to his house. Everything looked normal from the outside. The power was on. The house was quiet. There was no strange glow, no loud noise, no obvious reason to be afraid. But inside, it still felt different. I think once a place scares you badly enough, it does not matter how normal it looks afterward. Your body remembers. We went up to his room, and there it was. Tenacious D, sitting on his bed, in plain sight, not under something, not hidden, not tucked behind anything. Right there on the bed, like someone had placed it there for us to find. I know for an absolute fact it had not been there before we left. We had searched his room. We had checked everywhere. That house was nearly empty, and there was no way we would have missed it sitting openly on his bed. But there it was. The movie that had vanished from the couch while nobody was home. The movie we had spent an hour and a half searching for. The movie my friend had asked his dad about right before the power went out. Now it was sitting in his room like it had been there the whole time. I still do not know how it got there. Maybe there is some simple explanation. Maybe we overlooked it somehow, even though I do not believe that. Maybe one of us moved it and forgot, though I know that does not make sense either. Maybe his parents came home without us knowing, placed it there, and left again, though that seems even less likely. All I know is what I saw. My friend put the movie on the couch before we went trick-or-treating. When we came back, it was gone. The power went out the moment he asked about it. Something grabbed his shoulder in the breaker room, and when we finally returned to the house later that night, the movie was sitting on his bed in plain sight. After that, neither of us felt like watching it anymore. When I was a kid, I used to visit my uncle's lodge during the school holidays. It was the kind of place that felt endless when you were young. The property was huge and backed right onto the edge of bushland, so my brother and I always had more than enough to keep ourselves occupied. There were places to explore, trees to climb, dry creek beds to follow, and little hidden areas that felt like they belonged only to us. As a kid, it felt like freedom. You could wander for hours and still feel like there was more to discover. One day, I was outside with my dog, playing near an empty creek. It was one of those quiet, hot days where everything feels still, the kind of summer day where the air barely moves and the bush seems to hum around you. I do not remember exactly what I was doing, but I remember my dog suddenly taking off into the trees. No warning, no hesitation, he just bolted. Everyone else had gone into town, and my dad was asleep inside the lodge, so I was pretty much alone. I called after my dog, but he did not come back. He was much faster than I was, and before I really thought it through, I ran after him. That was a mistake. The bushland all looked similar once I got far enough in. Trees, scrub, dirt, dry leaves, shadows. At first, I thought I knew where I was going. I thought if I just kept moving, I would catch up to him, or he would come running back to me, but he did not. And very quickly I realized I was lost. I started getting upset. I could not find my dog. I did not know where I was. And suddenly the huge property that had always felt exciting felt too big, too quiet, too easy to disappear in. I turned around, trying to work out which way I had come from. I thought if I ran back, I could get my dad, wake him up, and he could help me find my dog. I was scared, but I still thought I could fix it. Then I tripped. From what I remember, my foot caught on a tree root or something hidden under the leaves. I lost my balance and went tumbling down an embankment. It happened so fast that I did not even have time to protect myself. I must have hit my head. The next thing I remember is waking up at the bottom of a small gully. For a few seconds, I had no idea where I was. Everything felt fuzzy, my head hurt, and the world seemed slightly wrong. Like I had woken up in a place I did not recognize. I was confused and scared, trying to remember how I had gotten there. Then I felt something wet on my face. My dog was licking me. He was lying right beside me. I still do not know how he found me, but I remember feeling so relieved when I saw him. I had been chasing him, then lost him, then gotten hurt, and somehow he had ended up right there next to me. In that moment, I did not care how strange it was. I was just happy he was there. But then he started barking. And it was not his normal bark. That is one of the details I remember most clearly. He was still lying flat on his stomach beside me, but he was barking in this low, strange, grumbling way. It was not excited. It was not playful. It was not the kind of bark he used when he saw another dog or heard someone at the door. It was warning, a deep, uneasy sound that made me scared before I even knew what he was looking at. I turned my head. There was a man standing there. He was a little way off, watching us from the bush. I remember he was wearing this old, faded cowboy-style hat, and one side of it had a big chunk missing. That hat stayed in my memory for years because it was so specific. It was not just worn out. It looked damaged, like something had torn or broken part of it away. The man looked down at me and spoke in a really deep voice. "Hey, kid, you had a pretty bad fall, but you should be all right. Let me get you back to your home." Then he walked over. My dog kept close to me, still tense, still making that low sound. But the man did not seem bothered by him. He helped me up, picked me up at first, then took my hand, and we started walking back through the bush. The whole thing is blurry in some ways, probably because I had hit my head, but two details from that walk are still very clear. The first was his gloves. I remember holding his gloved hand and thinking it was strange because it was the middle of summer and really hot. No one wore gloves in weather like that, especially out in the bush. But he did. His hand felt covered, hidden, and I remember noticing it even through the fog in my head. The second thing I remember was my dog. He walked so close to me that I kept nearly tripping over him. He was pressed right against my leg the entire way back, bumping into me as we moved. It was like he did not want any space between us. He stayed wedged between me and the man as much as he could, almost guiding me, almost guarding me. The man did not say anything else. At least, I do not remember him saying anything after those first words. He just walked me through the bush in silence, holding my hand and leading me back. It did not feel like we walked for very long. Somehow, we reached the creek bed much quicker than I expected. Then I heard my dad calling my name. He was calling me for dinner. That sound snapped everything back into place. Suddenly, I knew where I was again. I could see the way back to the lodge. I felt safe. I let go of the man's hand and started running toward the house. After a few steps, I remembered I had not thanked him. I turned around and called out, "Thanks, mister." But he was already gone. There was no sound of him walking away. No glimpse of him moving between the trees. Nothing. He had just disappeared. At the time, I did not think too much about it. I was a kid, and I was still shaken from the fall. I figured he must have been in a hurry, or maybe had turned off somewhere without me noticing. I was just glad to be back. A few days later, I was in the supermarket with my mom. It was one of those small country town supermarkets that sold a bit of everything. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and there are old photos and local notices on the walls. I was wandering around while my mom shopped when I noticed a photograph hanging up. It showed a man in a cowboy hat, an old faded cowboy hat, with a big chunk missing from one side. My stomach dropped. It was him. It was the man who had helped me in the woods. I got excited at first. I wanted to thank him properly, or at least tell someone that he had helped me get home. So I asked the person working there who he was. That was when I found out his name. Mr. Rogerson. He had been the original owner of the store about 30 years earlier, and he was dead. The person told me he had died in a freak accident in the same woods where my dog and I had gotten lost. Apparently, back when he owned the store, he used to grow vegetables himself, somewhere in the middle of the bushland. I do not know why. Maybe the soil was better out there, or maybe it was just something he liked doing. One day, he went out to check on the vegetables. While he was there, a terrible storm started. He tried to get back, but his dog, who always went with him, fell down a steep embankment into a small gully. Mr. Rogerson went down after it. While he was in the gully, a branch broke off a tree and hit him. It broke his back. They did not find him for weeks. When they finally did, his dog was still there beside him. It had died of starvation. That is how I found out about Mr. Rogerson, and after hearing that story, I could not stop thinking about what had happened to me. My dog had run into the trees. I had chased him, gotten lost, tripped, and fallen down into a small gully. I woke up with my dog lying beside me. Then a man in a damaged cowboy hat appeared and led me back home. A man who had died years earlier after going into a gully to save his own dog. Maybe I was confused from hitting my head. Maybe I saw someone else and mixed him up with the man in the photograph later. Maybe my child's mind connected things that were not really connected. Those are the explanations people can reach for. But I remember that hat. I remember his deep voice. I remember his gloves in the summer heat. I remember my dog pressed against my leg the whole way back, acting strange and protective. And I remember turning around to thank him, only to find that he was already gone. I do not know why Mr. Rogerson helped me, if that is really who he was. Maybe because I was a lost child. Maybe because I had fallen the way he had fallen. Maybe because my dog was with me, just like his dog had been with him. Whatever the reason, he got me back to the creek bed. He got me close enough to hear my dad calling, and then he disappeared into the bush, the same place where he had been lost so many years before. About 7 years ago, late one night, I was alone in my room on the second floor of our house, trying to finish homework. It was one of those nights where the whole house felt too quiet. My sisters were over at a friend's place, and both of my parents were working the night shift, so for the next several hours, I had the house completely to myself. At first, that felt like a good thing. No one was around to bother me, no one was making noise, and I could sit in my room and get my work done without interruptions. My room was directly above my dad's den. That room was his space. It had his things in it, his chair, his setup, and most importantly, his new audio system. He had recently bought it, and at the time, it felt like the greatest sound system in the world to me. It was loud, clear, and way better than anything I had in my own room. I had also just bought a new CD player, and like a lot of people did back then, I had an MP3 CD with a ridiculous number of songs on it. It had over 100 tracks, maybe more, enough music to play for hours without stopping. So while I was sitting upstairs, staring at my homework and trying to keep myself focused, I suddenly had an idea. Since no one else was home, why not use my dad's audio system? His den was directly below my room, so if I hooked up my CD player down there and turned the volume up, I could hear the music clearly through the floor while I worked upstairs. It seemed like the perfect plan. I could get my homework done and still enjoy my music without dragging speakers into my room. I got up from my desk, grabbed my CD player, and ran downstairs. The house was quiet, except for my footsteps. When I reached the den, I turned on my dad's audio system and connected my CD player to it. I remember being excited in that small, simple way you get excited when you figure out how to make something work. I pressed play, turned the volume up, and music filled the room immediately. It sounded great down there, but I needed to know how it sounded from upstairs. So I ran back up to my room. The moment I got there, I could hear it perfectly. The sound came through the floor and into my room, clear and loud enough to keep me energized, but not so loud that it felt painful. Everything was working exactly how I wanted. I remember feeling pleased with myself, like I had created the perfect study setup. I sat back down at my desk, picked up my pencil, and got back to work. For a little while, everything was normal. The music played beneath me, the sound coming up through the floor in a steady rhythm. I focused on my homework, probably math or some other assignment that had to be finished by the next day. I got into that zone where you are not exactly enjoying the work, but you are moving through it. Problem after problem, answer after answer. The house still felt empty, but with the music playing, it did not feel as quiet or lonely. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed something. The music had stopped. At first, I did not react in a dramatic way. I just lifted my head a little and listened. There was no sound coming from downstairs. No beat, no guitar, no vocals, nothing. The house had gone quiet again. I thought it was strange because I knew I was listening to an MP3 CD. It was not a regular CD with 10 or 12 songs that might end quickly. This thing had over 100 songs on it. There was no reason for the music to stop after only a few minutes. I sat there for a second, trying to think of a normal explanation. Maybe the CD had skipped. Maybe the player had frozen. Maybe I had not connected something properly. Then another thought crossed my mind. Maybe my sisters had come home. That would have made sense. If they had come back from their friend's place, maybe one of them had gone into the den and messed with the CD player, either because the music was annoying or just to mess with me. So I got up and went to check outside. I looked out for any sign of a car in the driveway. Nothing. No headlights. No vehicle. No one walking toward the house. It did not look like anyone had come home. The house still seemed empty. That made the silence feel a little different. I went downstairs to the den to check the CD player. The room looked normal, Nothing was out of place. The audio system was still on. The CD player was still connected. But when I looked at the screen, I saw the pause symbol blinking. That was weird. It had not stopped because the CD was done. It had not skipped to the end. It was paused right in the middle of a song. I knew I had not paused it. I had pressed play and gone upstairs. Nobody else was supposed to be home. Still, I did not panic. At that point, it was strange, but not terrifying. Electronics act weird sometimes. Buttons stick. CD players can be cheap and unreliable. Maybe I had accidentally hit something before I left the room. Maybe the player had some problem I did not know about. I shrugged it off, pressed play again, and the song continued from the middle like nothing had happened. That part made it even stranger, but I tried not to think too much about it. The music started again, filling the den, and I went back upstairs. I told myself it was nothing. I sat at my desk again and went back to my homework like everything was normal. For about another minute it was. Then the music stopped again. This time it was not a slow fade or a natural ending. It stopped abruptly. 1 second it was playing, and the next second the house dropped into silence. That sudden quiet hit harder than before. I froze with my pencil in my hand and listened. The silence felt heavy. I turned my head, thinking maybe it was just the end of a song, and there was a pause before the next one. But no, it was too quiet. The music had stopped completely again. Then I looked toward the wall outside my room. My bedroom door opened toward the hallway, and from where I was sitting, I could see part of the wall near the top of the stairs. There was a light above the stairway, and it cast shadows along the wall. Usually, I would not have paid attention to it, but in that moment, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. There was a shadow on the wall. At first, it looked like someone was standing near the top of the stairs or moving in the stairwell. The shadow stretched across the wall outside my room. Dark and human, like enough to make my brain immediately understand it as a person. But then, it started getting shorter and shorter. It looked like someone was walking down the stairs. That is the part I will never forget. The shadow moved exactly like a person descending the steps. As whoever or whatever it was went lower, the light changed the shape of the shadow, making it shrink down the wall. It was not random. It did not look like a tree branch moving outside a window. It looked like a body moving down the staircase. My heart jumped straight into my throat. For a second, I could not move. I just stared at the wall, watching the shadow shorten as it went down the stairs. My mind started racing. My sisters were not home. My parents were at work. No one else should have been inside the house. And yet the music had been paused twice, and now there was a shadow that looked like a person moving down the stairs right outside my room. Fear hit me all at once. I quickly grabbed something nearby for protection. I cannot even remember exactly what it was now. It was probably just whatever object I could get my hands on fastest. Something heavy enough to make me feel like I was not completely helpless. My voice came out louder than I expected when I shouted into the hallway. "Who's out there?" No response. The silence after that question was worse than the silence before it. I stood there, waiting for someone to answer. I expected to hear one of my sisters laugh and say they were just messing with me. I expected to hear a voice, footsteps, anything, but there was nothing. No one said a word. I waited another second, then forced myself to move. I slowly walked toward my bedroom door, every step feeling heavier than the last. My body wanted me to stay in the room and lock the door, but I knew I had to look. If someone was inside the house, hiding in my room would not help much. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I reached the doorway and carefully peeked around the corner. The stairs were empty. There was no one standing there, no one in the hallway, no one on the steps. I looked down toward the foyer and there was nobody there either. Everything was still. Everything looked normal. The light above the stairs shone down like it always did, but the shadow was gone. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. I had seen something. I knew I had. I had watched that shadow move down the wall. I had not imagined the music stopping. And now, once again, the house was silent. I decided to go downstairs and check the CD player again. I moved carefully, listening for any noise. Every creak of the floorboards sounded too loud. Every dark corner felt like it could be hiding someone. When I reached the den, I looked at the CD player. It was paused again. The same blinking pause symbol stared back at me from the screen. That was when the situation stopped feeling like a weird electronic problem and started feeling like something was very wrong. Someone or something had paused it again. It was not possible, but there it was. The CD player was sitting there in pause mode, right after I had seen the shadow moving down the stairs. I did not feel brave anymore. I felt exposed. The house was too big, too quiet, and too empty. I kept imagining someone standing just around a corner, waiting for me to turn my back. My parents were not home. My sisters were not home. I was alone, or at least I was supposed to be alone. But everything that had happened made me feel like I was not. That was when I remembered my dad's shotgun. My dad had a 12 gauge in the house. I knew where it was, and in that moment it seemed like the only thing that could make me feel safe. I made a dash for it. I was scared, but I moved fast. I got the shotgun and loaded it with 6 shells. The sound and weight of it changed the feeling in my hands. I was still terrified, but now I felt like I had some kind of control over the situation. I ran back upstairs with the shotgun and started clearing the house. Looking back, I know how intense that sounds, but at the time, I truly believed there might be someone inside. I went room by room, checking everywhere I could think of. Bedrooms, closets, bathroom, corners, any place where someone could hide. I was moving with pure adrenaline. My senses felt sharper than normal. Every sound made me turn. Every shadow made me raise the gun. There was nobody. At least I did not find anyone. That did not make me feel much better. In some ways, it made it worse. If I had found my sister hiding and laughing, I would have been angry, but relieved. If I had found a stranger, at least the fear would have had a clear shape. But finding nothing meant I still had no explanation. The CD player had paused twice. I had seen the shadow. I had shouted and gotten no answer, and now the house was empty. For the next few minutes, I paced back and forth upstairs with the shotgun in my hands. I could feel sweat on my face. My body was still flooded with adrenaline. I kept listening, expecting to hear footsteps, or a door closing, or the CD player clicking off again. The house had the kind of silence that makes your ears invent sounds. I would stop, listen, then move again. My breathing sounded too loud. My heartbeat felt loud. I kept wiping sweat away from my eyes with the back of my hand because I did not want anything blocking my vision. I stood near the top of the stairs, looking down toward the foyer. From there, I had a view of the entry area. If someone came in, I would see them. If someone moved downstairs, I would hear them. I was trying to stay ready, but I was also fighting the strange fear that maybe whatever I had seen was not a person at all. Then, I heard the door open. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. My whole body reacted before I even had time to think. I brought the shotgun up and aimed down the stairs toward the foyer. The sound of the pump action was loud in the quiet house. Shh. That sound echoed through the hallway, sharp and final. I was sweating, my hands tight on the gun, my eyes locked downstairs. In that moment, I was ready for whoever had just come into the house. My mind was still caught between fear and panic, and I did not know what I was about to see. Then my sister looked up from the foyer. "Ah!" She screamed so loud, it probably could have woken the neighbors. And honestly, I do not blame her. From her point of view, she had just walked into her own house and looked up to see me standing there at the top of the stairs, aiming a loaded shotgun down at her like something out of a nightmare. The second I realized it was her, the fear shifted into shock and relief all at once. My body was still in full panic mode, but now I had to lower the gun and explain why I was standing there like a lunatic. She was scared out of her mind, and I was shaking from the adrenaline of everything that had happened before she came in. I do not remember every word we said after that. I am sure there was yelling. I am sure she asked what was wrong with me. I probably tried to explain as fast as I could, telling her about the music stopping, the CD player being paused, the shadow on the wall, and how I thought someone was in the house. But explaining it out loud made it sound insane, even though every part of it had felt completely real while it was happening. The strange thing is, my sister coming home explained one thing, but it did not explain the important things. She had not been there when the music stopped the first time. I had checked outside and there were no cars. She had not been there when I went downstairs and found the CD player paused. She had not been there when it paused again. And she definitely had not been inside the house when I saw the shadow moving down the stairwell wall. At least, I do not think she had been. I had checked. I had looked. I had searched the house. Nobody was there. And that is what still bothers me about that night. The ending sounds almost funny now because of how badly I scared my sister. A guy home alone, already terrified, holding a shotgun at the top of the stairs, only for his sister to walk in and scream. It sounds like something people would laugh about later, and maybe part of it is funny in hindsight. But the part before she came home was not funny. The music stopping once could have been nothing. The CD player could have glitched. The pause button could have been sensitive. Maybe there was some weird issue with the player. I could accept that. The music stopping twice was harder to ignore. Finding the pause symbol blinking both times made it worse. It was not just that the audio stopped. The CD player was actively paused, and each time it continued from the middle of the song when I pressed play again. That meant something had triggered the pause function. Then there was the shadow. That was the part I could not explain away as easily. I saw it move down the wall as if someone was descending the stairs. I saw it get shorter and shorter under the light above the stairwell. That was not a blinking screen or a faulty wire. That was something visual. Something that looked like a person moving in my house when no one should have been there. Maybe there was a normal explanation. Maybe a passing car outside cast a moving shadow through a window. Maybe some object shifted. Maybe the light hit something in a strange way. Maybe my mind, already on edge because of the music stopping, turned a harmless shadow into a person. I know fear can do that. Once you feel like something is wrong, your brain starts connecting every little detail into a bigger threat. But I had not been that scared before I saw the shadow. I was confused, yes, but I was not panicking yet. The shadow is what changed everything. It looked real enough that I grabbed something for protection and shouted into the hall. It looked real enough that I went downstairs and checked the CD player again. It looked real enough that I got my dad's shotgun and searched the entire house. That is not the kind of reaction you have to nothing. For a long time afterward, I thought about that night whenever I was home alone. The house felt different in the quiet hours. The den under my room did not feel like just a den anymore. The stairwell light did not feel ordinary. Even music playing from downstairs had a strange feeling attached to it, because I kept remembering the sudden silence when the CD player paused. I never got a real answer. I do not know if there was someone in the house and they somehow left before I found them. I do not know if my CD player malfunctioned twice in a row at the worst possible time. I do not know if the shadow was caused by something outside. And I do not know why all of those things happened together in such a short span of time. All I know is that I was alone in the house, doing homework late at night, listening to music through my dad's audio system. The music stopped. The CD player was paused. I pressed play and went back upstairs. The music stopped again. A shadow moved down the stairwell wall like someone was walking down the steps. I shouted and got no answer. I checked the CD player, and it was paused again. I armed myself, searched the house, and found no one. Then my sister came home and almost had a heart attack when she saw me aiming a shotgun down the stairs. That was the only normal human being I saw that night. Everything else remains unexplained. When I was a baby, my parents lived in an apartment in the city. I obviously do not remember any of this myself because I was too young, but the story was told to me later by my mom, my dad, and my aunt. It became one of those family stories that sounded almost impossible, but everyone who was there told it the same way. Nobody acted like it was a joke. Nobody told it like they were trying to scare people for fun. They always talked about it like it was something strange that happened during a difficult time in their lives, something they never fully understood, but something they also never forgot. The apartment was not anything special from the outside. It was just a city apartment, the kind of place young parents might move into because it was what they could afford at the time. My mom and dad were starting their life together, trying to raise a baby, dealing with work, bills, stress, and all the normal pressure that comes with being young adults and new parents. To them, the apartment was supposed to be a home, maybe not their forever home, but at least a place where they could settle for a while and take care of me. Before they moved in, they found out that the person who had lived there before them had died in a car accident. It was not something hidden from them. They knew about it when they got the apartment. I do not know how much detail they were given, and I do not know if the person died right after moving out or while still living there. But they knew that the previous tenant was gone, and that her death had been sudden and tragic. A lot of people might have felt uncomfortable moving into a place with that kind of history, but my parents did not think too much of it at first. People die every day. Apartments change tenants all the time. In a city, every building has stories. Every room has been lived in by someone else before you. My parents probably thought it was sad, but not enough to stop them from living there. They had a baby to take care of and real-life responsibilities in front of them. A sad story about a person who used to live there was not enough reason to turn down a place they needed. At first, everything seemed normal. They moved in, unpacked, and started building a routine. My mom took care of me, my dad worked and helped where he could, and life went on the way it does when a baby is in the house. There were late nights, bottles, crying, diapers, exhaustion, and moments where both of them were probably running on no sleep. The apartment became filled with all the sounds that come with a young family. The television in the background, dishes in the kitchen, my parents talking, me crying or laughing or making baby noises. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. Then my mom started seeing the woman. It did not happen in a dramatic way at first. There was no full-body apparition standing in the middle of the room, no face pressed against the window, no voice calling her name. It was more subtle than that, which in some ways made it worse. My mom would be in the bedroom or passing by the bedroom area, and from the corner of her eye, she would see a woman standing in the bedroom doorway, just standing there. My mom would turn to look directly at her, and the woman would disappear. At first, my mom tried to ignore it. That is what most people do when something strange happens inside their own home. You do not want to immediately admit to yourself that you might be seeing something impossible. You tell yourself it was a shadow. You blame tired eyes, lack of sleep, stress, or the way light moves through a room. And my mom had plenty of reasons to be tired. She had a baby. She had responsibilities. Her mind was busy all the time. It would have been easy to tell herself she was just imagining things. But it kept happening. Every so often she would catch that same figure in the same kind of way. A woman in the bedroom doorway. There for just long enough to be noticed, then gone the moment my mom looked directly at her. It was not constant, but it was repeated enough that my mom could not simply dismiss it as a one-time mistake. The woman was there often enough to become a pattern. My mom did not say anything to my dad right away. She kept it to herself for months. I think part of her was afraid of sounding crazy. Part of her probably hoped it would stop. If she never said it out loud, maybe it would not become real. That is the strange thing about experiences like that. As long as they stay inside your own head, you can still question them. You can still tell yourself maybe it did not happen the way you remember. But once you say it to someone else, you are forced to face it. So for months, my mom saw the woman and said nothing. Then one day, she finally decided to tell my dad. She began carefully, probably trying to choose the right words. She must have expected him to laugh, dismiss it, or tell her she was just tired. But before she could even fully explain what she had been seeing, my dad looked at her and finished the sentence for her. He knew. He had been seeing the same thing. That was the moment everything changed. My mom was no longer alone in it. It was not just her imagination. It was not just lack of sleep. My dad had seen the woman too, standing in the bedroom doorway, appearing at the edge of vision and vanishing when looked at directly. They had both been living with the same strange presence in the apartment, each thinking they were the only one noticing it. I can only imagine how that conversation felt. On one hand, it must have been terrifying to realize that both of them had been seeing the same figure. On the other hand, there may have been some relief in it too. At least my mom knew she was not losing her mind. At least my dad knew he was not alone either. Whatever was happening, it was happening to both of them. Over time, the woman in the doorway became something they got used to. That sounds strange, but people can get used to almost anything if it happens enough. At first, something like that would make your heart race. You would turn on lights, check the room, maybe refuse to walk around alone at night. But after months of seeing the same figure and nothing bad happening, fear can turn into routine. The apartment may still have felt strange, but the woman did not seem aggressive. She did not attack them. She did not scream. She simply appeared, watched, and disappeared. Eventually, my parents accepted her as part of the place. They may not have liked it, but they learned to live with it. A woman standing in the doorway was unsettling, but if she never harmed anyone, maybe it became easier to treat her as something harmless. Maybe they even started to believe she was the spirit of the woman who had lived there before them. The woman who had died in the car accident. Maybe she had come back to the place she knew. Maybe she did not understand she was gone. Maybe she was just attached to the apartment. But as time went on, other things began to happen too. My parents used to fight sometimes, like many young couples do. They were under stress, raising a baby, working, trying to manage life in a city apartment. Arguments happened. But there was something strange about the way the apartment reacted whenever they fought in front of me. The television and lights would turn on and off, not every time someone raised their voice in another room, not random little flickers that could easily be blamed on old wiring. The strange activity seemed to happen when they were fighting in front of me. If the argument got heated, the TV and lights would start acting up, switching on and off, as if something in the apartment was trying to interrupt them. It was like a warning, like something did not want them arguing around the baby. That is one of the details that makes the whole story feel less like a haunting and more like a presence that was watching over me. If the woman had wanted to scare my parents, she could have done much worse. But instead, the strange activity seemed connected to moments when I was nearby and my parents were upset. The lights and TV turning on and off would break the argument, pull attention away from the fight, and remind them that something else was in the room. Maybe that sounds ridiculous, but that is how the story feels when my family tells it. The presence in that apartment did not seem cruel. It seemed protective. One of the clearest moments happened when my mom was at work and my dad was home alone with me. I was still very little at the time, only around 5 months old. My dad was holding me, probably doing the usual things parents do with babies, bouncing me a little, trying to keep me calm, maybe watching TV or walking around the apartment with me in his arms. Then he suddenly got chills. There was no obvious reason for it. No cold air blowing through the room, no open window, no change in temperature that made sense. It was just that sudden feeling people sometimes describe when they sense someone near them. The kind of chill that runs across your skin before your mind understands why. At first, my dad did not know what caused it. Then he noticed me. I was looking over his shoulder. Not just looking, either. I was playing peekaboo with someone. My dad watched as I looked over one shoulder, then the other, as if I was trying to find a person moving behind him. I would look over his left shoulder, then over his right shoulder, following something he could not see. And I was laughing. Not crying, not scared, not unsettled. Laughing the way babies laugh when someone is playing with them. My dad stood there holding me, covered in chills, realizing that I was reacting to someone behind him. He could not see anyone, but I clearly could. At least that is what it looked like. I was only 5 months old, too young to fake something, too young to understand how to act out a game for attention. Babies that age respond to faces, voices, movement, and energy. They laugh when someone makes them laugh. They look toward things that catch their attention. And according to my dad, I was focused on something over his shoulder, moving my gaze back and forth like someone was playing with me. That moment stayed with him. I think it would stay with anyone. Holding your baby and realizing they are happily playing with someone you cannot see would be enough to make the bravest person feel weak in the knees. But again, I was not afraid. That is important. Whatever I saw, or whatever I thought I saw, made me happy. I was laughing. I was engaged. I was playing. If the woman in the apartment was the one behind him, then she was not frightening me. She was making me laugh. Eventually, my aunt moved in with us to help take care of me. She became my babysitter, and with my parents working and dealing with their schedules, it helped to have family there. I do not know how much she knew about the strange things happening in the apartment before she moved in, but she ended up having the most important experience of all. One night, both of my parents went out. My aunt was watching me. At some point, she and I fell asleep together in her bed. I was asleep next to her, lying on my back. I was still a baby, still small and completely helpless, the way babies are at that age. I could not roll myself safely the way an older child could. I could not call for help. I could not tell anyone something was wrong. While I was sleeping on my back, I spit up. That may sound like a normal baby thing, and usually it is. Babies spit up all the time. But this time, because I was lying on my back, I started choking on my own spit up. My aunt was asleep beside me and did not know it was happening. That is the part that is hardest to think about. I was right there, in danger, but too small to save myself. My aunt was close enough to help, but asleep. My parents were not home. There was no one awake in the room. If nothing had happened, the story could have ended very differently. Then something violently shook the bed. Not a gentle movement, not a small shift that could have been my aunt moving in her sleep. She woke up because the bed was being shaken hard, violently enough to pull her out of sleep immediately. Whatever did it wanted her awake right then. It was not subtle. It was urgent. My aunt woke up and realized something was wrong. She looked at me and saw that I was choking. I was on my back, unable to clear it myself. She reacted quickly and turned me onto my side, allowing me to breathe again. That movement may have saved my life. If she had kept sleeping, if she had woken up a few minutes later, if the bed had not shaken, there is no telling what would have happened. After she turned me and made sure I was okay, she knew something had woken her. She knew the bed had been shaken. She knew she had not imagined it. And she knew that whatever had shaken the bed had done it at exactly the right moment, when I needed help and could not call for it. So she simply said, "Thank you. That is the detail that always gets me." She did not scream. She did not run out of the room. She did not curse at whatever was there or demand that it leave. She said thank you, because whatever it was had saved me. Whether it was the woman my parents had been seeing or some other presence in that apartment, it had noticed I was in danger and had done the one thing it could do to wake my aunt up. That moment changed the way my family looked at the apartment. Before that, the woman in the doorway may have been unsettling. The lights and television turning on and off during arguments may have been strange. My dad getting chills while I played peekaboo with someone invisible may have been creepy. But after my aunt woke up to the bed shaking and found me choking, the presence no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something that had been watching over me the whole time. That does not mean the apartment stopped being strange. I am sure it still felt uncomfortable at times. Seeing a figure out of the corner of your eye is not something most people want in their home. Having lights and electronics turn on and off during fights would make anyone nervous. But it is hard to be angry at something that saved your baby. When I think about it now, the story feels less like a horror story and more like a mystery about care, grief, and attachment. If the woman really was the previous tenant who died in the car accident, maybe she stayed behind because she could not let go of the place. Maybe she had no family with her. Maybe she saw a young couple move in with a baby and became attached to us. Maybe the sound of a baby in the apartment reached whatever part of her remained there. Maybe she protected me because I was helpless. Of course, I cannot prove any of that. I was just a baby. Everything I know comes from the people who were there. But my mom, my dad, and my aunt all had experiences that seemed connected. My mom saw the woman. My dad saw her too. The electronics reacted when my parents fought in front of me. My dad felt chills and watched me play with someone invisible over his shoulder. My aunt was violently woken when I was choking in my sleep. These things were not all experienced by one person. Different members of my family witnessed different parts of it. That is why the story has stayed in our family. Some people might say there are normal explanations. Maybe my parents were tired and saw shadows. Maybe the lights and television had electrical problems. Maybe babies look around and laugh at nothing all the time. Maybe my aunt woke up because she sensed me choking, and in her half-asleep state, it felt like the bed shook. Those explanations are possible, and I understand why people would reach for them. But when all of those things happened in the same apartment, around the same time, after my parents already knew someone had died before them, it becomes harder to dismiss. One strange thing can be brushed off. Two can be coincidence. But a pattern begins to feel different, especially when the pattern seems to center around a baby being watched, calmed, and protected. I sometimes wonder what my parents felt when they finally moved out of that apartment. Were they relieved? Did they miss the presence in some strange way? Did they worry that they were leaving behind someone who had become part of their life? I do not know. I should probably ask them more about it someday. Family stories often have small details that get left out over time, and the older I get, the more I want to know. I would like to know what the woman looked like to them. Was she clear or shadowy? Young or old? Did she seem sad? Did she seem aware of them? Did she always stand in the same doorway? Did they ever feel afraid of her, or did they mostly feel watched? I would like to know whether the apartment felt cold when she appeared, whether there were certain times of day when she showed up more often, and whether anyone else ever saw her. But even without those extra details, the main story is powerful enough. A woman appeared in the bedroom doorway and vanished when my parents looked directly at her. Both of them saw her before they ever admitted it to each other. The lights and television turned on and off when they fought in front of me. My dad held me and felt chills while I laughed and played peekaboo with someone he could not see. Then one night, when I was asleep beside my aunt and choking on my own spit-up, something shook the bed hard enough to wake her, giving her the chance to save me. That is the part that matters most. I am alive because my aunt woke up in time, and according to her, she woke up because something made sure she did. So, no, it is not the scariest ghost story. It is not the kind of story where a demon crawls across the ceiling or a shadow figure whispers threats in the dark. It is quieter than that, stranger than that. In a way, it is almost comforting. If my family is right, and there really was a ghost in that apartment, then that ghost may have saved my life. And honestly, as strange as it sounds, I am grateful for that. The stories may be over, but some nights do not end when the video does. The people you heard tonight were not looking for fear. They were living normal lives until one moment changed the way they saw the world around them. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to Nochtmire Witness for more true accounts from people who saw something they wish they could forget. Good night, and if you wake up suddenly, do not assume it was just a dream.